There is a particular kind of silence that happens right before something can't be unsaid, and I have never forgotten the sound of it in that dining room. 40 champagne glasses were raised beneath the chandelier Harold had installed the year he retired. Every one of them suddenly stopped in midair because my son had stood up before his grandfather could finish his toast. Harold's mouth was still open. The word he'd been about to say, I think it was going to be family, of all things, never came out. He looked at his grandson the way you look at a car that's drifted into your lane. Disbelief first, then the instinct to brace for impact. Eli was 17, and he did not look nervous. That was the part that unsettled me most. He was holding a single folded piece of paper in one hand, gripping it like something he'd rehearsed holding. Something he'd decided a long time ago he was going to say out loud in front of every person in that room who mattered. "Grandpa," he said, his voice completely steady, "before you thank everyone for showing up, I think you should know who actually kept this family standing." I didn't know yet what was written on that paper. I didn't know why Lorraine's hand had gone completely still on the tablecloth, and I didn't know why Harold, a man who had once stared down a platoon of 19-year-olds without blinking, couldn't seem to meet his grandson's eyes. But to understand why my son said those words, you have to go back 14 years. To the day my wife almost wasn't allowed to be family at all. 14 years is a long time to spend proving you belong somewhere, and my wife had already been doing it for years before I ever met her. Mara was 16 when her parents were killed in a car accident outside Harrisburg. The Whitfields, friends of the family, people who had known her since she was in diapers, took her in because nobody else stepped forward. Harold and Lorraine never legally adopted her. They never quite got around to the paperwork that would have made it official. But Mara took their name at 18 and called them Mom and Dad, and for years that seemed to be enough. By the time I married her, she'd folded herself into that family the way you fold a fitted sheet. Awkwardly, patiently, until it finally lies flat. She was the one who set up online bill pay for Harold after his stroke scare. She drove Lorraine to her cardiology appointments every Tuesday because Connie worked and Beth said she just couldn't do Tuesdays. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every little detail that everyone else seemed to forget, and nobody ever asked her to do any of it. I remember one evening, early in our marriage, walking into the kitchen and finding her at the table with a worn manila envelope. The edges were soft from years of handling. Across the front, in Mara's neat handwriting, were 4 words: Whitfield House Fund. She was tucking 2 folded 20s from her own purse inside. I asked her what it was for. She shrugged, like the answer wasn't worth explaining. "Just in case," she said, "things come up." She didn't tell Harold. She didn't tell Lorraine, and she certainly didn't tell Connie or Beth, who probably would have found it strange that their brother's wife was quietly saving money for a family she'd married into. I loved her for it. but it was hers. Lorraine had cried when she opened it. She told Mara it was beautiful. Then the quilt disappeared, folded in tissue paper on a high shelf in the hall closet. Meanwhile, a store-bought fleece throw sat draped across the good couch in the living room, ready for every guest to see and use. Eli noticed. He was 6 or 7, sitting cross-legged on the floor at Christmas, when he looked toward the closet and asked Lorraine. In the flat, unfiltered way, children ask questions adults have learned not to. Why does Mom's blanket live in there if it's so pretty? Lorraine laughed. Oh, that old thing? It's too special to use, sweetheart. Then she changed the subject. Fast. Fast enough that even a 7-year-old understood he'd touched something the grown-ups didn't want touched. I saw it too, plenty of times. And I told myself it was nothing. Small talk. Old-fashioned turns of praise. Families have their quirks. Mara never complained, so who was I to keep score on her behalf? For years, I used every excuse I could find because the alternative was admitting something I didn't want to admit. My wife was spending her life trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided she didn't have one. Then Harold got sick, and nothing started costing us everything. The first real cost came when Harold's heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in the garage, and everything after that happened fast. Mara was the one who answered the ambulance dispatcher's questions because Lorraine was too shaken to hold the phone straight. Mara was the one who sat in the surgical waiting room until 2 in the morning. She spoke to the cardiologist in the hallway, then came back and translated the medical terms into plain English for the rest of us. When Harold came home, she arranged the home health aide for his 6 weeks of recovery, because Connie lived 2 hours away and Beth said her work schedule just couldn't bend right now. Then the hospital bill arrived. There was a gap the insurance wouldn't cover. Nearly $3,000 for a specialist Harold needed, but Medicare hadn't cleared yet. Mara paid it from the envelope in our kitchen. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't want credit. She just didn't want her father-in-law skipping a follow-up appointment because of money. A month later, the family gathered for dinner to celebrate Harold's recovery. Lorraine stood with a glass of wine and thanked everyone for pulling together. Then she smiled at Connie. I don't know what we would have done without you. You really held this family together when we needed you most. Connie hadn't paid $1. She'd visited twice. Mara sat beside me, her fork moving slowly through her mashed potatoes. She said nothing. I watched her make the decision in real time, not to correct the record. The second blow came at Christmas the following year. Beth was 2 glasses of wine into the evening when she asked her mother, half joking but clearly hoping for a real answer. So, who gets what eventually? Are we talking equal shares, or is somebody getting the good china? Lorraine laughed. Oh, the house goes to our real children, obviously. We'll figure the rest out. The table kept eating. Nobody flinched except us. Mara's fingers tightened around her fork for 1 second. Across from her, 11-year-old Eli looked up. He didn't look at his grandmother. He looked at his mother. He was watching to see what she'd do. Mara smiled. There's plenty of pie left, she said. Then she stood up and started clearing plates that didn't need clearing. The third blow came 3 years later. This time, it had a name and a date. Harold and Lorraine called it a family meeting. Everyone gathered in the living room. The quilt was still folded somewhere in the hall closet. The fleece throw was still draped across the good couch. Harold cleared his throat and announced, in the careful, rehearsed tone of a man reading from notes his lawyer had prepared, that he and Lorraine were simplifying the will. The assets would be divided evenly among their children, their biological children. Any decisions about the house, the estate, or their future care would be made by immediate family only. Mara had never been formally adopted as an adult. She had spent 14 years driving them to appointments, managing their emergencies, and quietly covering gaps nobody else even noticed. But she wasn't included in their definition of immediate family. She would, Harold said, always be welcome as family, informally. That word hung in the room, informally. Nobody asked why the woman who had handled nearly every crisis in that house for more than a decade was being formally written out of it. Nobody defended her. I opened my mouth. Mara's hand found my knee beneath the table. Just a small, steady pressure. Not here, not now, please. So I said nothing. I have never forgiven myself for that particular silence. Across the room, Eli was 14, old enough to understand exactly what had happened. I glanced at him. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was watching his mother's face with that same careful, cataloging expression I'd seen years earlier when he'd asked about the blanket in the closet. He didn't say a word, but his jaw had tightened, the same way his mother's did when she had already decided not to let something show. Mara never defended herself that night. She hadn't defended herself any of the other nights either, but I didn't know then that her son had been keeping track. Every insult, every slight, every time his mother gave more than she received, he had been counting all of it, quietly, for years, and one day he was going to stop being quiet. The phone call came a few weeks after the family meeting, and Lorraine meant it, I think, as a kindness. She called Mara directly, her voice warm in the particular way it always was when she thought she was being generous. She told her that, of course, she was still welcome at every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Sunday dinner. As family, informally. The paperwork was done, she said, like she was closing out a minor administrative matter, but that didn't change how much they loved her. Mara stood in our kitchen with the phone pressed against her ear, her shoulders perfectly straight. She said thank you, she said of course. She said she understood completely. When she hung up, she placed the phone gently on the counter, the way you set something down when you don't quite trust your hands not to shake. Then she looked at me. It's fine, she said. It's their family, their choice to make. Eli had been standing in the hallway. He was 17 now, taller than me, old enough that I'd stopped thinking of him as a boy who didn't understand what he was hearing. He didn't argue with her. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at his mother for a long moment. Okay? Then he went upstairs. I remember feeling almost relieved. I shouldn't have. Later that night, long after the house had gone quiet, I found him at his desk. His bedroom door was cracked open. The lamp was on, and spread across his desk was the manila envelope from our kitchen drawer. Whitfield House Fund was still legible across the front in his mother's handwriting. He had emptied it completely. Hospital receipts, bank withdrawal slips, appointment confirmations going back years. And beside all of it was a stack of birthday cards, at least a dozen. Everyone addressed to Lorraine in Mara's handwriting. Everyone still sealed, never opened, never acknowledged. Mara had sent them over the years the same way she'd sent everything else, with hope, even when she had less and less reason for it. Eli photographed each card, one at a time. He laid them flat beneath the lamp, took a clear picture, then moved to the next. Receipts, dates, amounts, cards, names. Everything arranged in neat, careful rows. He wasn't looking through his mother's things like a curious kid. He was building a record. He didn't know I was watching. I didn't say anything. I quietly closed the door and went to bed. I told myself it was probably nothing. Some private project. Something 17-year-old boys did when they were angry and didn't know what to do with it yet. I was wrong. That night, my son wasn't trying to understand what had happened to his mother. He was making sure nobody could pretend it hadn't happened. Harold's 80th birthday was going to be the biggest gathering the Whitfields had thrown in years. Lorraine had been planning it for months. The good hall was rented. There were more than 40 guests on the list. Not just family, but neighbors who had known Harold since he moved on to Sycamore Street, and 2 of his old army buddies driving in from out of state. It was supposed to be a celebration of a long, well-lived life. Lorraine wanted everything perfect. A few weeks before the party, Eli asked if he could give the toast. Lorraine was delighted. She told everyone who would listen that her grandson wanted to say a few words for his grandfather. At the next Sunday dinner, I watched her practically glow over the idea, already imagining some sweet, sentimental speech about fishing trips and Little League games. Nobody asked him what he was actually going to say. Why would they? He was a good kid, quiet, respectful. The kind of grandson people assumed they understood. What none of us knew, not even me, despite what I'd seen through that cracked bedroom door, was that Eli had spent every free evening since Lorraine's phone call building something. I discovered it slowly. A folder, thin, unremarkable. He kept it in his backpack instead of his room. Inside were copies of the photographs he'd taken, hospital billing records with Mara's payments highlighted, and a timeline he'd typed himself year by year, documenting what she had done for the family. The appointments, the bills, the emergencies, the things everyone else had forgotten. Near the back was a photograph of the quilt, still folded in tissue paper on the closet shelf. 14 years old. Still carrying the little fabric store tag Mara had never removed. One night, I walked past Eli's room and heard him talking. Low, steady. I looked through the gap in his door. He was standing in front of his mirror with a sheet of paper in his hand, reading from it under his breath. He stumbled over one sentence. Started again. I knocked. "What are you doing?" He didn't flinch. He simply folded the paper and looked at me. There was something in his expression that unsettled me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't nervous. He looked settled, like he'd already made a decision I hadn't fully understood yet. "Someone has to say it," he told me. Then he added, "And it can't be her." I asked him what that meant. He shook his head. "You'll understand soon enough." He said he wasn't trying to start a war. He just wasn't going to sit through one more dinner and watch his mother get erased a little further while everyone smiled and passed the rolls. I should have pushed harder. I should have asked to see the folder. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for years. I told myself it would probably be fine. Eli was a good kid. He wouldn't do anything reckless. So I let it go. Mara had no idea any of it existed. She spent that week helping Lorraine plan the seating chart and picking up Harold's favorite bakery cake, humming while she worked. She was happier than I'd seen her in months. She thought the whole family was finally going to be together in one room. She had no idea what her son had planned for that room. 3 weeks later, I sat at that birthday table with 40 people around me, watching Harold raise his glass. I still didn't understand that my son was about to hand his grandparents the bill for 14 years of pretending my wife didn't count. Eli stood when the room quieted for toasts. For a moment, it was exactly what everyone expected. He thanked Grandpa Harold for teaching him to cast a fishing line off the dock at the lake house, for the terrible jokes at every dinner, for 80 years of showing up in the ways people could see. Lorraine was beaming. Harold had one hand pressed against his chest, already a little misty, already reaching for his water glass. Then Eli unfolded the paper. Something in his voice changed. "But I want to talk about who actually showed up," he said, "because I don't think anyone in this room actually knows." He read it plainly. No theatrics, no anger, just facts. He talked about the morning Harold's heart gave out. How Mara sat in the hospital hallway until 2 in the morning. How she arranged the home health aide. How she quietly paid the $3,000 gap the insurance wouldn't cover from an envelope in her kitchen drawer. Then he mentioned Lorraine's toast afterward. The gratitude she had expressed toward Connie. Eli didn't call her a liar. He simply gave the date, the amount, the name of the person who had actually paid. Then he moved on. He talked about every Tuesday appointment his mother had driven Lorraine to for more than a decade. He talked about the birthdays, the holidays, the things Mara had done when nobody was watching. Then he reached into the folder and pulled out the stack of birthday cards. A dozen of them, still sealed. These were sent to Grandma every year, he said. Every one of them came back unopened. Connie's face changed. Beth slowly put down her fork. Eli reached into the folder again. This time, he pulled out a photograph. He held it up. The quilt, folded in tissue paper. The fabric store tag still pinned to one corner after 14 years. "This is what she made for you," he said. His voice caught for the first time. 4 months of stitching by hand. She was 16 years old, and she had nobody left in the world except the people in this room. He looked toward Harold and Lorraine. "She gave it to you because she wanted to belong." Nobody moved. She kept giving after that. His eyes moved around the table. "And none of you noticed." Harold's old army friend Wallace leaned toward him. "Is that true, Harold?" Harold didn't answer. His jaw worked once, then twice. Nothing came out. Lorraine had gone completely white. Her hand was pressed flat against the tablecloth, fingers spread as though she needed something solid beneath her. Connie stared at her plate. Beth stared at the table. Nobody looked at Mara, nobody except Eli. My wife was sitting perfectly still beside me. Tears stood in her eyes. She looked at her son as though she was seeing him for the first time. Eli folded the paper. He slid the photograph back into the folder. Then he sat down. He picked up his water glass, raised it slightly toward Harold. "Happy birthday, Grandpa?" He took a sip, set the glass down, and waited. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Harold finally spoke. His voice was low. "She wasn't adopted." Mara closed her eyes. I felt something inside me drop. Harold looked around the table as though the explanation should have been obvious. "We loved her," he said. "But she wasn't family?" Mara said it quietly. It was the first word she'd spoken all night. Harold stopped. Mara looked at him, then at Lorraine, then at the quilt photograph still visible inside Eli's folder. "You know," she said, "I spent 14 years thinking if I did enough, eventually I wouldn't have to prove it anymore." Nobody interrupted her. I was wrong. Her voice didn't break. That somehow made it worse. She reached across the table and put her hand over Eli's. "But my son shouldn't have had to prove it either." The room went completely silent. And for the first time in 14 years, nobody at that table had an excuse left. It took a few seconds for the room to remember how to move. Then everything moved at once. Wallace was the first to speak. He didn't bother lowering his voice this time. 50 years I've known you, Harold," he said, shaking his head slowly. "And I never once figured you for a man who'd write off the person holding your family together." He looked toward Eli. "That boy shouldn't have had to be the one to say it." Harold opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, shoulders caved in over his untouched cake. A man who had spent 80 years being the loudest, most certain person in any room suddenly had nothing to say in the one that mattered. Connie found her voice next. "This isn't the place for this," she said sharply. She glanced around the room as though she could somehow restore the old politeness if everyone simply agreed to pretend nothing had happened. Then Ruth spoke. She was the quiet neighbor from 2 doors down who had brought Harold soup during his recovery. "Actually," she said evenly, "I think it's exactly the place." Connie looked at her, then away. She had nothing to say. Beth kept staring at the tablecloth. Lorraine stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped backward. She murmured something none of us caught and hurried toward the restroom, one hand pressed against her mouth. Nobody followed her. For several seconds, nobody seemed to know if they were supposed to. I found Mara near the edge of the room a few minutes later. She wasn't angry. Not only angry, anyway, she looked exhausted, exposed, mortified in the way you feel when something private has suddenly been laid out in front of 40 people you'll have to see again at every holiday for the rest of your life. But underneath all of that was something I hadn't expected. Relief. The kind of relief that comes when you've carried something alone for so long that hearing someone else finally name it feels almost like putting the weight down. I found Eli by the coat rack. He was already looking for her. Mara didn't scold him. She walked straight over, took his face gently between both hands, and searched his eyes the way she used to when he was little and had scraped his knee. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Eli didn't look away. "Yes, I did." He swallowed. Nobody else was going to. She pulled him into her arms, right there in the middle of the hall. I stood a few feet away and let them have the moment. And I thought about all the years my wife had swallowed one slight after another, so nobody else would have to feel uncomfortable. I thought about the things I'd watched and explained away. The jokes, the introductions, the quilt, the money, the will, the silence. And I realized something I'd been too afraid to admit. Mara had spent 14 years trying to preserve a family that had never been willing to protect her. Her son had finally decided that preserving the peace wasn't worth protecting the people who kept breaking it. We left not long afterward. The 3 of us walked past a room still murmuring behind us, past half-eaten cake and untouched champagne, past people who suddenly seemed very interested in anything except looking at us. On the drive home, nobody said much. I honestly believed we'd just witnessed the end of whatever relationship remained between Mara and the Whitfields. I thought that dinner had ended our connection to them for good. I was wrong. Because what happened over the next year wasn't what any of us expected. Nobody called for weeks. That silence felt like an ending in itself, and I think all 3 of us had quietly made peace with it being one. Then, almost 2 months after Harold's birthday, he called Mara directly. He asked if she'd come by the house alone. Just the 2 of them. No family meeting, no agenda. No one else in the room. Mara was nervous getting ready that morning in a way I hadn't seen in years. I offered to drive her part way and wait outside. She let me. When she came back, she didn't go inside our house right away. She sat in the car in the driveway and told me what happened. Harold hadn't tried to explain himself. He hadn't blamed his generation. He hadn't talked about how he'd been raised or how things were different when he was young. He hadn't made excuses at all. He'd simply sat across from her at the kitchen table and said the words plainly. He had spent 14 years treating her like a guest in a house she'd spent 14 years holding together. And he didn't have a good reason, only pride, and a narrow idea of what family was supposed to look like. Then he asked her something he'd never asked before. If she would let him start over, not the will, not the house, not the paperwork, just as her father, properly, if she'd still have him. Mara told him she needed time. Harold said that was fair. He told her he wasn't asking her to answer that day. What he did afterward mattered more than anything he could have said. A few weeks later, he called and asked if she'd help him choose a frame. He didn't tell her what it was for. When she arrived, she found the quilt missing from the hall closet. Harold had taken it down himself. He'd had it professionally cleaned and repaired where 14 years of folding had worn thin creases into the fabric. The same deep blues, the same warm golds, the same uneven stitches a 16-year-old girl had sewn by hand when she was trying to say thank you for taking her in. Harold wanted to hang it above the fireplace, the first thing people would see when they walked through the front door. He only wanted Mara's opinion on the frame. They chose plain dark wood. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic. And Mara told me later that watching an 80-year-old man stand on a step stool, fussing over whether the quilt was perfectly level, was the closest thing to an apology that had ever truly reached her. Lorraine's repair came slower and smaller. She showed up to the next family dinner quieter than I'd ever seen her. She chose her words carefully. She complimented Mara's cooking twice without being prompted. She asked Eli how his senior year was going, and she used his name, not the boy. Eli. It wasn't everything. Mara never pretended it was. I never asked her to. The will was eventually rewritten. Quietly, no announcement, no toast. Mara was added back in, not as some grand gesture, but as a correction to an injustice that should never have existed in the first place. Connie and Beth never fully reckoned with what they'd allowed to happen. Maybe they never will. The house didn't magically become perfect. But something important had changed. The truth had finally been spoken. And after that, nobody could pretend they hadn't heard it. For 14 years, Mara had believed she had to keep proving she belonged. For 14 years, I watched her do it. And for too many of those years, I told myself keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting her. It wasn't. My son understood that before I did. He understood that family isn't the people who share your blood, your last name, or the deed to your house. It's the people who show up, the people who stay. And sometimes when the people who should have seen you refuse to look, family is the person brave enough to stand up in a room full of silence and make them see. I think about that quilt sometimes. It hangs above the fireplace now instead of being folded away in the dark, and I think about what it took to get it there. Blood decides who you're born to. It never decides who stays, who shows up at 2 a.m. in a hospital hallway, who quietly covers the gap nobody else notices, who remembers the birthday, who keeps showing up even after being given every reason to stop. Mara never asked anyone to defend her. She spent 14 years trying not to be a burden to people who never fully claimed her as their own, and she probably would have carried that hurt quietly for the rest of her life if her son hadn't decided, at 17, that he'd counted enough silence for one lifetime. That's what Eli understood before the rest of us did. Family isn't who shares your blood, it isn't who has your name on a piece of paper, and it isn't who claims you when it's convenient. Family is who stays, who shows up, who sees you when everyone else has decided not to look. Sometimes the person who speaks up for you isn't the person you expected. Sometimes it's the person who has been watching quietly all along. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments about someone in your life who never got the credit they deserved. And if you believe dignity is worth standing up for, subscribe for more stories like this one, and share this with someone who may need the reminder that their worth was never determined by who chose to recognize it.